For years, there was one city in Israel that everyone, soldiers, generals, intelligence chiefs, believed was untouchable. Not Tel Aviv, not Jerusalem, Dimona, a small desert city in southern Israel, surrounded by sand and silence, and sitting just 6 miles away from Israel's most guarded secret, the Shimon Peres Negev Nuclear Research Center. The facility Israel has never officially confirmed exists, the place where most intelligence analysts believe Israel built its nuclear arsenal, a site defended by multiple overlapping layers of the most advanced missile defense technology on Earth. If any city in Israel was supposed to be safe from Iranian missiles, it was Dimona. On the night of March 21, 2026, that belief shattered, along with the walls of dozens of apartment buildings across the city. An Iranian ballistic missile punched straight through Israel's air defense systems and detonated in a residential neighborhood. Buildings collapsed. A 12-year-old boy was left fighting for his life with shrapnel wounds. Then, just hours later, a second missile hit the nearby city of Arad, declared a mass casualty event, injuring 116 more people, including a 5-year-old girl. Total injured that night, over 180 people. And for the first time in this war, possibly for the first time ever, Iranian missiles had successfully penetrated the air defense shield protecting the area around Israel's nuclear program. This is what modern warfare looks like, and this is the story of how we got here. To understand what happened on March 21st, you need to understand what has been happening since February 28, 2026, because that is the day the Middle East changed forever. For years, the United States and Israel had been watching Iran inch closer to nuclear weapons capability. Talks failed, sanctions failed, covert operations slowed things down but didn't stop them. By January 2026, Iran was in political chaos. Massive street protests, a weakened economy, a regime under unprecedented internal pressure. And that is exactly when the decision was made. In the early hours of February 28, 2026, while Iran's negotiators were still engaged in what they believed were ongoing diplomatic talks, the United States and Israel launched one of the most coordinated military offensives in modern history. The U.S. codenamed it Operation Epic Fury. Israel called it Operation Roaring Lion. Nearly 900 strikes in 12 hours, B-2 stealth bombers flying from undisclosed locations, approximately 200 Israeli Air Force jets crossing into Iranian airspace simultaneously. Tomahawk cruise missiles fired from U.S. warships, bunker buster bombs, the GBU-57, the most powerful non-nuclear bomb in the U.S. arsenal, dropped on Iran's underground nuclear facilities at Natanz, Isfahan, Fordow, and Qom. And then, in the opening hours of that same morning, Israeli jets executed what military analysts are already calling one of the most precise decapitation strikes in the history of warfare. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the man who had ruled Iran with an iron fist for over 3 decades, was killed. Along with him, dozens of senior Iranian officials and IRGC commanders killed in simultaneous strikes targeting their known locations across Tehran and beyond. In a single morning, the United States and Israel had bombed Iran's nuclear program, decimated its military leadership, and killed its supreme leader, all while nuclear talks were still technically underway. Iran's response was immediate. Within hours, the IRGC launched hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones, targeting Israel, U.S. military bases in Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply flows. Global energy markets went into shock. Oil surged past $100 a barrel. Airlines began rerouting flights away from the entire Middle East. A full-scale war had begun. What followed over the next 4 weeks was something the world had not seen since the Gulf War of 1991, and in many ways, it was far more dangerous. The United States and Israel began systematically working through Iran's military infrastructure. By mid-March, U.S. Central Command reported striking more than 8,000 Iranian military targets. Iran's Air Force, missile launchers, drone storage facilities, naval vessels being degraded one by one. Iran's missile fire toward Israel dropped from triple digits in the first days of the war to single digits by day 10. U.S. and Israeli forces had hunted down and destroyed an estimated 3/4 of Iran's operational missile launchers. But Iran was not finished. Iran's strategy shifted. Rather than trying to overwhelm Israel's defenses with mass barrages, a tactic that had worked to some degree in the 12-day war of June 2025, Iran began playing a different game. Smaller, more targeted salvos, precision strikes designed to send specific messages, tit-for-tat escalation, carefully calibrated to hurt without triggering all-out annihilation. The Haifa oil refinery was hit. The Persian Gulf became a war zone, with Iranian mines discovered in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran fired missiles toward the British-American military base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, a move that showed Iran was willing to extend this war far beyond the Middle East. Iran even fired missiles targeting Arab Gulf states that had long sought to improve relations with Tehran, potentially isolating itself further in the region. Through it all, Israel's missile defense systems held, mostly. The Iron Dome, David's Sling, and the Arrow systems intercepted roughly 92% of incoming Iranian projectiles. Israeli military spokesman pointed to that number with pride. Iran's ability to cause mass casualties was being degraded, but 92% is not 100%. And in modern warfare, the 8% can change everything. Now here is where the story gets critical, because what happened on March 21st was not random. It was a direct response to something the United States did that same day. On the morning of March 21st, 2026, 3.5 weeks into the war, U.S. forces conducted a fresh round of strikes on Iran's Natanz nuclear facility using bunker-buster bombs. Natanz had already been hit multiple times in the 12-day war of June 2025, and again at the very start of this war in February. But the U.S. kept going back, because Natanz is not just a building, it is the heart of Iran's uranium enrichment program. Destroying it completely, permanently, was one of the core objectives of this entire campaign. Iran immediately blamed both the U.S. and Israel for the strike. Israel's military denied involvement but did not deny U.S. participation. The Pentagon declined to comment entirely. Iran's parliament speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf went on social media hours later and issued a pointed warning. If Israel was unable to intercept missiles near Dimona, the most protected airspace in the country, it would signal that the war had entered a completely new phase. That evening, Iran made good on the implicit threat. At approximately 10 p.m. local time, air raid sirens began screaming across southern Israel. Israeli air defense systems detected incoming Iranian ballistic missiles and engaged immediately. Interceptors were launched. The system worked exactly as designed, and then the missiles hit anyway. The first missile struck Dimona directly. The interception had failed. A full warhead, carrying hundreds of kilograms of conventional explosives, detonated in a residential neighborhood. 12 separate impact sites were identified across the city. Buildings shattered. A 12-year-old boy was critically wounded by shrapnel. A woman in her 30s suffered serious injuries from glass. 30 more people were treated for lighter wounds. Israel's emergency services declared a major incident. One resident, Galit Amir, told AFP from outside her damaged home, "We thought we were safe. Dimona is the most safe place in Israel." That belief was gone now. Then, just hours later, the second strike hit Arad, a city about 35 kilometers from the nuclear research center. 3 apartment buildings were destroyed. Fires broke out on the 4th floor of one residential structure. 116 people were injured, 7 of them seriously, including a 5-year-old girl. Israel's emergency services were overwhelmed. Helicopters airlifted casualties to regional hospitals. Officials declared a mass casualty event. By the end of the night, more than 180 people had been injured across both cities. 11 of them were in serious condition. And this is the detail that matters more than any other. This was the first time in this entire war that Iranian missiles had successfully penetrated Israeli air defenses in the area around the country's nuclear program. Israel's military admitted it publicly. IDF spokesman Effie Defrin issued a statement confirming that air defense systems had engaged both missiles but failed to intercept them. The IDF opened a formal investigation. The Air Force's Chief of Air Defense Systems acknowledged it plainly. "Our air defense system is the best in the world, but it is not hermetic. There are mistakes, there are malfunctions." For Israel, this was not just a physical blow, it was a psychological one. The invincibility of the system protecting Dimona, the system protecting Israel's most sensitive national security secret, had been exposed as a myth. Iran's parliament speaker said it directly. This was operationally significant. This was Iran proving it could reach places it was never supposed to reach. Now, what happened next tells you everything about how close this conflict came to spinning completely out of control. Within hours of the Dimona and Arad strikes, U.S. President Donald Trump went on Truth Social. And the language he used was unlike almost anything a sitting U.S. president has said in modern times. Trump threatened to hit and obliterate Iran's power plants, starting with the largest one first, if Iran did not reopen the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours. Not sanctions, not diplomatic pressure, obliterate. He set a hard deadline, 48 hours, Monday evening. Iran's response came fast. The Iranian Revolutionary Guards issued a statement. If the United States attacked Iran's energy facilities, Iran would deem all vital infrastructure across the Gulf region, including in U.S. allied Arab states, as legitimate targets. Iran's parliament speaker went further. If Trump struck power plants, Iran would completely shut the Strait of Hormuz in response. Think about what that means. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Roughly 1/5 of the world's entire oil supply passes through it. Closing it would not just affect gas prices in America, it would trigger an energy crisis across Europe, Asia, and the entire developing world. The economic consequences would be staggering. The world held its breath. Monday came. Trump's 48-hour deadline expired, and then something unexpected happened. Trump blinked, sort of. He announced that the United States was postponing strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure for 5 days. He claimed the U.S. was in negotiations with Iran to end the war. Iran immediately denied that any talks were taking place, calling Trump deceitful. Stocks rallied. Oil prices dropped slightly. The immediate threat of catastrophic escalation receded, temporarily. But the underlying reality had not changed. Iran had demonstrated it could still hit Israel near its most sensitive facilities. Israel's air defenses had publicly failed. Trump had threatened to obliterate a country's power infrastructure. Iran had threatened to close the world's most important oil shipping lane, and a formal war was still raging across the Middle East, with no clear end in sight. Netanyahu visited Dimona and Arad the next day, standing at the sites of the strikes, vowing that Israel's military would continue fighting on all fronts and that strikes on Iran would increase significantly in the coming week. He called the Iranian attacks an attempt at mass murder targeting civilians. He said the fact that no one was killed that night was, in his own words, due to luck. Let's pull back from the headlines for a moment and talk about what is actually happening here, because there are several layers to this story that most coverage is missing. First, the nuclear dimension. Iran's state media said clearly that the strikes on Dimona and Arad were targeting Israel's nuclear research center, retaliation for U.S. strikes on Natanz. And while the nuclear facility itself was not directly hit, the IAEA confirmed no damage and no abnormal radiation levels. The symbolic message was unmistakable. For decades, Israel has maintained a policy of deliberate nuclear ambiguity, never officially confirming or denying that it has nuclear weapons. That ambiguity has been a cornerstone of its national security doctrine, and for decades the Dimona facility has sat at the heart of that doctrine, considered so sensitive and so well defended that attacking it was essentially unthinkable. Iran just thought about it. Iran just tried to do it. And Iran got close enough to cause real damage just 10 kilometers away. Israeli security experts were blunt in their analysis. Zaki Shalom, a senior fellow at the Misgav Institute for National Security, said that even a symbolic strike near Dimona would represent a major psychological and strategic achievement for Iran, because it damages the prestige of Israel's defense system in a way that cannot be easily undone. That prestige matters. Deterrence is not just about having weapons. It is about making enemies believe those weapons are protected. That belief just took a hit. Second, the air defense reality check. Israel's multi-layered air defense system, Iron Dome, David's Sling, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, is genuinely the most sophisticated in the world. No serious analyst disputes that. But sophisticated is not the same as perfect. The IDF intercepted roughly 92% of incoming Iranian projectiles across 4 weeks of war. That is an extraordinary achievement. But Iran fired hundreds of missiles. 8% of hundreds is still dozens, and all it takes is one ballistic missile with a warhead carrying hundreds of kilograms of explosives landing in the wrong place at the wrong time to produce catastrophic casualties. Netanyahu said himself, the lack of mass fatalities that night was due to luck. In modern warfare, you cannot build a national security strategy on luck. Third, what this war has changed permanently. The June 2025 12-day war between Israel and Iran was historic, but it still felt, to many observers, like a limited conflict, two states testing each other's red lines and then stepping back. The 2026 war is different. The United States is directly involved. Khamenei is dead. Iran has a new supreme leader in Mojtaba Khamenei, widely described as more hardline than his father. The U.S. has struck Iran's nuclear facilities with its most powerful bunker-buster bombs. Iran has attempted to strike Israel's nuclear program. Both sides have demonstrated they are willing to cross lines that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. A conditional ceasefire was eventually declared on April 8, 2026. But ceasefires in this region have a history. The fundamental tensions, Iran's nuclear ambitions, Israel's security red lines, U.S. strategic objectives in the Middle East have not been resolved, they have been intensified. Here is what you need to take away from all of this. What happened on March 21, 2026 was not just one missile hitting one city, it was a signal, a demonstration. Iran, despite weeks of relentless strikes on its military infrastructure, despite losing its supreme leader, despite having an estimated 80 to 90% of its missile capability degraded, still found a way to reach the city that sits at the doorstep of Israel's nuclear program. The Iron Dome is extraordinary, but extraordinary is not invincible. Trump threatened to obliterate Iran's power plants. Iran threatened to close the world's oil supply. The IAEA urged restraint near nuclear facilities. Russia warned of a catastrophic regional disaster. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, 180 civilians in two small desert cities were pulled from the rubble of their homes, not because they were soldiers, not because they were targets, but because they happened to live near the most contested piece of ground in the modern world. This is what modern warfare looks like in 2026. It is not clean. It is not contained. And it is not over. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening in this conflict, the real facts, the real stakes, the real consequences, then share it with someone who needs to understand. Subscribe for more coverage as this war continues to develop, because in geopolitics, the story is never finished. It only gets more complicated.